That led to intercepting Osama bin Laden videos and other lieutenants' videos and interactions, and turned into a whole ordeal, which then led to some work with the CIA.
Welcome to Partner Path, a podcast that unpacks the venture capital and growth equity ecosystem from a junior perspective. Young entrepreneurs and investors have already had a massive impact on the industry, having started unicorns and launched billion-dollar funds. We discuss these success stories and more by sharing perspectives and advice from some of the industry's most prominent role models. This podcast expresses our views as of the date published and does not represent the views of and is not endorsed by any company for which we work.
Joining us today is Jeff Schumann, co-founder and CEO of Aware. Prior to Aware, Jeff spent the majority of his career leading enterprise collaboration at Nationwide, where he was accountable for the delivery and operation of 1,000 enterprise applications. In 2017, Jeff founded Aware with the goal of unlocking workforce operations and closing the distance between everyday employees and executive management. Welcome, Jeff.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So your entrepreneurial journey started a long time ago in middle school, and since then you've gone on to build over 10 companies. So how did your upbringing start this entrepreneurial journey and get you to where you are?
It's a long story, Laura, but there's so many things to draw upon all the way back in the day. I think it's important to first give recognition where recognition is due. My parents, I drew a lot from them. My dad was in tech at a very young age. He was the tech nerd in the family, and I learned a lot from him at a very young age as a result. So I was always tinkering with technology, like you said, all the way back to middle school and even prior to that. But really, my first investment, I would say, that really turned into something meaningful was taking some of my learnings around tinkering with software and coding, which I was beginning to do probably 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, and apply that to something that was really interesting and meaningful to me, which at the time was the launch of a TV show. And it's sad to admit that I became a fan of in high school called Big Brother, which is run by CBS. And I had built a software application to help viewers of that TV show watch the live streams from that TV show on their computers, which today would be really easily done. Not to date myself, but back then, not so simple to do. So my technology helped with that and achieved mass adoption for those that watched the show and became a hit. I learned a lot.
Okay, take a few steps back. How did it just achieve mass adoption? There had to have been some steps along the way.
You don't just press a button and then it's like there. No, there were some steps. There were some steps along the way. First and foremost, I had no idea how to get a technology tool that you built, adopted, and used by anyone. Really, what I was doing was I built the software app for myself first. I felt that there had to be a better way to watch live streams on your computer than using real archaic and legacy tech that you guys might not even remember, but it was one video player was called Media Player, built by Microsoft. Another that people used was called Real Player, built by Real Networks. Both were convoluted, overly complex, filled with advertising. And that's how you would watch videos on your computer and listen to music. It was annoying, frustrating. So I thought, let me build my own player. But I built it for myself because I wanted to watch these live streams without viewing advertisements during the show. And so I thought I could simplify that and wound up doing it. And then said, hey, I like this thing. I wonder if anybody else would like it. And I posted it online for free at first on some message boards, which is how you would talk about technology back then. Maybe today it would be like TikTok or Instagram or LinkedIn, but then it was message boards. And some people said, hey, this is really cool. I'd love to pass it to my friends. And they started passing it to their friends. And eventually I thought, I wonder if I could charge for this. And that became a whole next chapter of the business was, what do you charge? How do you charge? How do you take payments and all that sort of stuff in an era that it wasn't common yet?
And I can imagine CBS didn't love that.
You're drawing on an interesting part of the story. So there's a part of that history that wasn't fully adopted or embraced by CBS and Real Networks. And it was the fact that some of the technology that I'd created made it very simple for somebody to record the live streams onto their computer at home. And so my view of the feature was this would make it easier for you to watch this show, maybe that happened overnight and you were sleeping and now you can watch it in the morning. The challenge that kind of emerged was that, similar to the story with Napster that you guys might remember, where Sean had created this beautiful software to make it easy to share songs among each other. it became a problem when people started to download copywritten content and share it across their friends' networks. Then suddenly Napster became at risk with the music industry. So similar story with me and CBS at the time was my user base grew to about 30 to 40, 50,000 people that were paying for the software every single summer to watch the live streams on their computers. And then they were recording those live streams using my software to watch later. The challenge emerged when suddenly people started taking those videos that they were recording and uploading them to the newfound video sharing site called YouTube. And CBS didn't love that. And they claimed that their copywritten content was finding its way to the internet. And ultimately, I faced the risk of being sued and paying penalties for every single video that had ever been uploaded to YouTube that might have come from my software being used. So it was an interesting part of the journey and a lot of learning for sure.
And I do think that was a super interesting story, but I think one that might top that was your next software build, which is actually to track Al-Qaeda. So it would be great if you could touch on how you got wrapped into the government side of technology and maybe any of those learnings you brought from CBS to now tracking Al-Qaeda.
It's almost going to sound unbelievable because when I ultimately write a book, I think a lot of people are going to read it and say, this is fact or fiction? But it is very much fact. And that's the fact that around when I was in high school, at the same time I was doing this Big Brother software stuff, I was learning the ins and outs of code and technology and the internet and everything, streaming protocols, internet protocols, all the stuff. And so I knew how a lot of it worked, but it was right around 2001, not to date myself, but to date myself, when 9/11 happened. And I found myself in a position of maybe I want to join the military because everybody was thinking that at the time to really go defend the country. Maybe I'd fly fighter jets. Maybe I'd join in the Army Rangers. Those were all ideas that were in the back of my mind. And found out that I had a heart condition, which said I could not fly fighter jets. I'd literally pass out if I was experiencing certain Mach G forces. So that maybe if I couldn't chase that passion and interest at the time, maybe I could find out how I can help the war on terror myself using some set of tooling that I know very well, and that was technology. And so ultimately used my newfound skills in understanding internet protocols and software to really figure out how could I affect the war on terror positively from our side. Wound up creating an intelligence tracking service called Tracking Terrorism, where I would intercept communications among Al-Qaeda jihadist members on the internet who primarily use the internet as a way to communicate amongst themselves, and would intercept those communications, translate them using machine translation software, which at the time, Google didn't have machine translation software. It wasn't a common thing. You literally had to pay thousands of dollars for this tech and install it onto your computer to be able to do it. I used the money I'd had from Big Brother to buy the software to be able to translate. And so I started intercepting these communications, translating them, and sharing them on the internet for everybody to see. That quickly led to the explosive growth of that service because people started to get this perspective on the war on terror that they weren't getting anywhere else. It was literally the Al-Qaeda perspective. That led to intercepting Osama bin Laden videos and other lieutenants' videos and interactions, and turned into a whole ordeal, which then led to some work with the CIA as well.
I mean, I have to ask, were you nervous that they were going to find out that this young boy is tracking them and they're going to come for you? Because that's what I would have been thinking.
I was probably naive at that time, Laura, to be honest. I was the stubborn high schooler, who believed that, they were, just nobody could ever get to me. That was probably my perspective. It felt real at times. I mean, I taught myself some Arabic to just be able to communicate. And you have to say a few things to be able to be further invited into areas of deeper connection within their networks. That was sometimes crossing a line that, wow, am I one of them to just be able to be invited into some of these areas to be able to intercept these communications? That felt weird, but it really became real when the CIA did reach out of Jordan. One of their units had recognized that we were getting mass adoption of our site and services by Al-Qaeda themselves, who were becoming growingly frustrated with the fact that their communications were being intercepted and shared on the internet for everybody to see. So the CIA and Tracking Terrorism, the service I had built, began to work together on this whole, what I didn't know at the time, but eventually emerged later, a psychological, kind of battle with Al-Qaeda. And it became real when ultimately Al-Qaeda hacked everything. The Al-Qaeda military internet arm out of Turkey at that time is where they operated. Literally destroyed our servers, hacked everything, defaced everything, stole a lot of data, and emailed every one of my family members because I was an idiot and had stored all my personal information on those same servers. And so they had access to who I was, who my family members were, and they contacted them with the same terrorist threats that you would expect. And that is when it started to feel a little bit more real. I think my mom was shocked at that point in time when that happened.
Oh, for sure. And I got to go into corporate America. So then,
Right. It was do the exact opposite. Where could they not find me? Yeah. Nationwide became the next stint for sure. I will just to give you some dates and times there. The whole CIA tracking terrorism thing took me from the end of high school into college for several years. So that would have been my first 2 or 3 years in college working on that in my dorm at night, doing all the things, and then had the opportunity to go work at Nationwide shortly after graduation from college.
and so you spent 8 years there within enterprise collaboration, which is part of the definition of what Aware is doing now. So maybe touch on the pain point you saw at Nationwide and then what led you to start Aware, and maybe just double down on what Aware is doing.
So it was brought aboard Nationwide, a little bit atypical to the culture that they had at the time, looking for somebody to establish and challenge the current culture and build new technology and help modernize some of the tech stack that Nationwide had across the business units. And so I seemed like a good party for that, having had a lot of knowledge in software and digital and so on and so forth. So it sounded fascinating because it sounded quite impossible to do effectively. So that's why I ultimately took the gig, thought I'd do it for a year or two, wound up doing it for 8, as you said, because I really enjoyed what it was that I was doing. And the idea behind Aware was born out of the fact that growingly, I continued to see I just had frustrations when working at Nationwide that wasn't attributed to Nationwide itself. It was more attributed to the challenges enterprises all saw and faced. And one of the things that bothered me the most that ended up leading to the idea behind Aware, which I'll share, was the fact that I felt the most powerful asset at the enterprise organization was the employee and the voice of the employee, because they had a wide perspective of what's working and what's not working, yet they were the most ignored voice across modern enterprise. And the way that we and every other company in the world was trying to tap into that voice of perspective was surveying. And I felt that that was mediocre at best. And I felt like there had to be a better way to have a continuous understanding of what people really care about and establish the voice of the employee in a more real time way that carries empowerment, authority over decision making. And I approached or at the time, two of our co-founders today, Matt Huber and Sean Domer, with the idea around helping to modernize organizations by getting technology embraced that was very difficult to get embraced at the time. Think chat technology, voice and video technology, et cetera. Help solve the problems organizations had with the risk of getting those technologies in place. And if we do that really well, then more aspirational than that, we would achieve the ultimate vision we set out to do, which is to uplift the voice of the employee by essentially digitizing that voice in a real-time manner and bringing it to the boardroom, which was going to be a very long journey to do so effectively.
Before I turn it over to Will, maybe just provide kind of a quick, tangible example or the type of customer who's using this product and what this problem you're helping them solve.
Yeah, so there's several. I mean, you can think of Aware as a platform that delivers real-time context. We call it contextual intelligence into the aggregate communications that are happening across the employee experience, from employee to employee to customer. And what that means is, at scale at any point in time, an organization really lacks context as to what's going on. They have to ask people, they have to ask their customers, how are you doing? Do you like the products? This is why you get surveys for that, right? They have to survey their employees. How are you doing? How are you feeling? Do you like our company? And like, what don't you like? And they have to ask those questions. And we felt with Aware, which is the use case that a lot of our technology or a lot of our customers use today, when they turn it on, they start to get these aggregate level of reporting based upon the artificial intelligence, real-time summarization of themes that are being discussed, coupled with the real-time sentiment of those themes, what employees feel about particular topics, or the CEO themselves, or any other things that are going on across the company. So it ends up being a very real, authentic view into what's working and what's not working, along with the ideas that could perhaps help the company be better.
I would add that not all the time are people totally straightforward and honest on surveys. it's kind of a formal process. And so sometimes you can see some skew in the actual answer quality of the information. Would love to hear you speak to your new product as well. I know you guys just launched Ask IQ. Maybe just touch on what the product does, also what type of data it consumes in order to provide that insight, and then how you're kind of changing the typical way that survey work is done. What is different from anything else that's out there?
So everybody's probably familiar with, especially your listeners and viewers, with ChatGPT. And the idea behind Aware's Ask IQ was we were starting to hear from our customer base the growing desire to have something ChatGPT like, but only really attached to their own data and something that had a broad understanding of their business. ChatGPT knows anything about you from what it's been able to gather on the internet, et cetera. It doesn't necessarily know the details of your sales or some of your intellectual property, et cetera, or maybe some of the highly classified business projects you're running internally that could change the game for your business long term. So if you take Aware's Ask IQ, what Ask IQ is able to do is using the same sort of technology behind ChatGPT, large language models and retrieval augmented generation. It's able to take your own proprietary data sources and train itself on just your data and understand your business at scale. Whatever you plug into it, Slack, email, chats, your own business tools. You might have a broad set of data sources that sit in CSVs today. You can plug that in. And what it's doing is it's training itself on that data over time, and it gets a real time understanding of your workforce and your business decisions and everything at scale. So then you're able to, like ChatGPT, ask it any question, literally ask the data any question and get an answer. And it becomes incredibly powerful when you think about the broad set of use cases that could be applied to that sort of technology.
The product actually has a strong ROI associated with it, right? A lot of people within organizations spend time understanding employee sentiment, whether it's a manager or even people in the people operations department. People have dedicated roles to this, and this is software that actually helps make those people more productive or even kind of reduce the need to have as many or focus on it as much. Just walk through a specific customer use case that would help bring the product alive to the audience.
Yeah, we can pick several, but I'll focus on one today, and we can go deeper into other areas if you guys want to. There's a massive disconnect that's continuing to grow today from the front line of every organization to those that make decisions. Think of it as like the CEO, the C-suite, et cetera. And that disconnect, especially post COVID, has led to higher attrition at organizations, lower productivity, higher disengagement, which leads to lower revenue, a misunderstanding of the customer, all of these sorts of things that have emerged kind of post COVID, which created a challenge environment for businesses to operate. So, how one of our most exciting use cases I see our customer base using the technology for today is complementing what it is that they do with surveys today by either surveying their customers, surveying their employee. They're plugging in Aware to the same sort of real time communication streams that are happening from Slack to Zoom to customer chat, whatever. And they'll ask it, hey, what is the front line, to your point, Will, not sharing today that's driving concerns and frustrations around why certain products aren't selling well? Like they should probably know because they're probably talking about it with customers and hearing feedback, but they're maybe not supplying that feedback into any other avenues that we have at this company because it's not easy to do so. And some just frankly don't want to. But it's sitting there naturally in some data storage area because people are conversing about this.
And it's providing the context for actual business decisions that are made. And it really focuses on generalizing thousands or millions of data points. I'm curious if you have anticipated or seen the need for executives or C-suite or whoever is making those types of decisions to actually point to a couple specific examples within the data set as opposed to relying on the generalization. Has that become use case or important at all?
It's incredibly important, especially when using RAG, so retrieval augmented generation here that we're talking about, that the summarization that's done, at least how.
Can you touch on what RAG is for maybe those who don't know?
Yeah. So think the easiest way to understand it is think of it as just summarization, the ability to summarize a large set of data really rapidly. Like that's explain it to me like I'm five. Like that's probably the easiest way you can get to the level of detail here. So Aware has lots of data because customers have connected lots of data to it. And the network of AI that we've built allows it to summarize at scale very quickly that data. So that's how it can answer a question very efficiently and swiftly. When it comes to specificity, we think it's super important, and the technology has this, where you got to build in controls where it's not always right. It's making an understanding based upon a lot of correlation analysis, right? It's seeing themes develop and it summarizes those themes and it answers your question with its view of those themes. But if you were to ask it, I want to know the individual that said some of these things, or tell me the five people, it can't answer that. It doesn't have that ability to process today from the controls that have been put in place. So if you try to ask it something like that, you won't be able to get to that level of specificity. However, it will be able to if you ask it a different question and say, hey, okay, well, tell me three things. If you summarize at an aggregate, are the three things you would recommend we should be focused on? Then it will give three specific things, but it's giving those three specific things based upon the math, the calculations it's done off of the summaries that it's pulled. And those summaries are largely attached to, hey, the majority of people are thinking we should go in this direction and do these three things to positively impact the business. So that is being done today. But I would be lying if I didn't share that we get asked all the time from especially security officers, well, I want to know. I want to be able to ask. I want to be able to ask my data who my biggest threat is. I want to know that tomorrow. Can the tech do that? Theoretically, the technology can be built to do that. But can you do that within Aware today? No, you cannot do that.
I'm sure this is also good in a distributed workforce world. I mean, you've seen some of the big tech companies force this in-office protocol, but overall, I mean, most of these enterprise companies, everyone is all over the country or all over the world. And so this is probably a tangible way to be able to pull insights and then track back later to see the impact that it's had on the organization, which I mean should hit the bottom line at some point.
That's for sure. In fact, you touched on a really important thing, Laura. What I didn't say is Aware also has access to the metadata from their environments if they choose to connect it in. So think of it like the geography information. So it could literally know that maybe particular regions of the world are feeling in this way about a particular product that was just launched, but other parts of the world are feeling differently. That's critical data when it comes to decision making.
It also feels a lot less intrusive than some of the technologies that have popped up in the last few years where it's tracking how long you are online or how long you are quote unquote working, which I'm sure people don't love to be monitored in that way. But this is such a positive reinforcement and feedback loop that ultimately, like you said, should increase retention.
Yeah, well, not to pick on some of these products, but I'll name one because it's a massive one. Like you think about Viva from Microsoft. I mean, a lot of times they're rolling out productivity evaluation tools. These sorts of things frustrate me where they simply say, is an employee productive based upon how many meetings they're attending, or how much time you spend, how much of your calendar is spent. It's such a weak way of trying to help an organization figure out what the most important asset is thinking about today and what could really be driving greater productivity. It doesn't matter if you're in a meeting 8 hours a day. That doesn't necessarily correlate to the fact that you're more productive or less productive. What really matters is, what is Will thinking? Like, what is Laura thinking about the products that we sell and the customer interactions that they've had? And maybe for all we know, an individual spends little time in meetings, and the quantitative metrics that would show that would correlate to the fact that they're not in meetings often. Maybe they're actually our most influential individual and have the most amount of knowledge around what could possibly drive the business forward. I think qualitative analytic technology, like what it is that we're building on Aware, when coupled with empowering the voice of the employee, that's the future of analytics at scale. And
For sure. And speaking about what you're building, I think it's also important to touch on where you're building, which is something we didn't comment on earlier, that Jeff is based in Columbus, Ohio. And there's been murmurs about building AI automation, not being on the coast, specifically San Francisco, can somehow might hinder your growth. So I'm curious how building in the Midwest, specifically Columbus, which actually I think was ranked as the top 5 growing tech cities last year, how that has helped or maybe potentially hurt the growth of the company.
yeah, well, it's also a number 3 real estate market I just saw too. The secret is getting out, and I wish people would stop talking about it because I don't want Columbus to become like the next Austin. It was like everybody was moving to Austin after COVID, and then all the things that come with everybody moving there, home prices dramatically increase, and so many other things naturally happen too. Look, Columbus is a tech ecosystem that many haven't necessarily have known it's really existed. Is we've got several data centers here, from Microsoft to Amazon to Meta, that have been built. Intel made the investment, $100 billion investment in building the chip processing plant out here, literally 10 minutes from where I'm at right now. it's led to the branding of this area as being called the Silicon Heartland, right? Really the heart of America. The fact is that you can get access to 99% of the Fortune 500 within a single day's drive from here, which is awesome. But one of the things that I think is most important with building a company in the Midwest, and there's several things that we can talk about, but one of the things I think are most important is the community here is something that's very different than the coast. People here, there's the culture of the environment is fascinatingly opposite of what you see in certain areas of the country. People generally want to help people here. You don't want to see your peers fail. It's not as cutthroat as you'd expect maybe Silicon Valley is. It's, hey, how do I help? Like, what are you guys doing? That's cool. Like, how do I help? And that I think is just core to what the Midwest is about, which makes it, I think, even easier to build because you get a lot of people collaboratively wanting to achieve greatness, whether they work for your company or not. And I think that goes down to just it goes back many decades ago to just the DNA of this part of the country, how they grew up, where your parents worked, where their parents worked, and who they are as individuals, which makes it a great ecosystem to build. But that coupled with the fact that tech is certainly coming to the region and venture capital, as you guys know, is certainly finding its way to the region, has made it even easier. Now, I just don't want everybody else to know because we like the secret. We want to keep it to ourselves. But I know that's unlikely. So
Totally fair. And I mean, speaking of culture, having worked with Jeff for a few years now, I should credit Aware to just being, I think, one of the most amazing company cultures. They're around Series C now. I'm really curious. Every company has similar values, but I do think Aware is unique in the sense that you've really carved out special values that makes everyone want to be a part of the Aware culture and the Aware team. I mean, what are some of the values and how have you, driven that forward within the organization?
yeah, and it's a great question because you can have amazing values and you can write these things on your walls and you can put them in a cultural handbook. But if you don't actually live by them, then it doesn't really matter, right? Enron had honesty and integrity as a cultural value. Clearly, not how they operated at an executive level. So it didn't matter. Our view of this is I think it can boil down to as simple of a question as culture can easily be defined as how employees feel on Monday morning because do you want to go to work? Are you excited about work? Are you excited about the problems you're solving? It's not going to be every Monday, but in aggregate, generally you're going to feel towards one predisposition. It's like we actually love what we do. We love coming to work. I'm excited about it, or I'm concerned. I'm frustrated. That if that grows organically and people are feeling that at scale, then we've got something wrong, right? We've got to fix it. That's the point of even our own technology. But if you do think about some of the statements that really matter to us, that we really live by every single day, one of the most important that our teams probably hear me say time and time again is context. Context is everything. Sometimes people say transparency matters. Well, what does that really mean? When you think about it, for us, it's being able to deliver the same knowledge and understanding that I have about the business and the things that I'm working on to even an intern that just started today. Let's all have the same context and let's operate with the same context in mind. Because if we do, you'll make probably different decisions today than you might have made yesterday if you didn't have the context. And then sometimes that gets challenged. I'll be asked by people, well, that's crazy. Why would you give the same context to everyone? What if they take it and post it on the internet and they start sharing it publicly? Well, then I say, well, wait a second. I thought we also had the value statement that we trust everybody. Like when we hire you on the understanding that there's this foundational level of trust and accountability. If you violate that trust and accountability, you will be terminated because you did something that violated it, right? The problem emerges across corporate America is when people violate values that have been written. Generally, that leads to some rewrite of the policies that are put in place where HR will say, we're now going to punish the 99% of the employees because somebody violated this one policy we had in the past. And as a result, now we're punishing everybody. My view is the complete opposite. Instead, eliminate the employee that violated the policy and punish the 1% rather than the 99% who are operating with our values in mind every single day. And so I think it does go down to trust the employees, but deliver context pretty daily, as much as you can. And if you think about one other kind of core factor that people see at Aware that also ties to context is context over control. So oftentimes I see at companies, large and small, control-based decision making, and I think that can kill a company. Control-based decision making is often when the highest paid person in the room is making decisions on behalf of the team that works for them, versus simply asking, "How can I help?" and empowering the team to make those decisions together. And I think that's what we look for at Aware is context-based leadership, not control-based leadership. Oftentimes, just because you're the manager doesn't mean you should be the one making the call. And so the org chart shouldn't drive decision making. And that's how we've operated since day one.
Changing gears slightly, I'd love to get your thoughts on personal data privacy, just given where your company plays and specifically where employers should draw the line. Obviously, communication on work-related applications or software seems like a totally expected use case. And as you mentioned earlier in the podcast, you guys have guardrails up that support being anonymous from that perspective as well. But I've seen other applications out there that go as far as screen recording, right? To see what your actual click rate is and typing and kind of your productivity on each app of each employee. And so obviously there is software that is being built that will enhance more closely, monitoring employees. I'm curious to get your thoughts on where should the line be, if at all, and should employees expect a level of privacy?
Yeah, and every company, to your point, Will, that's building technology in a similar space will probably make decisions that align to their own values, right? Ours correlate to what it is that we have built today, which I think it's incredibly important to go back to what the original idea behind Aware was. And that's there is a ignored voice that exists at every company. And we listen to our data and our infrastructure far more frequently at scale and better than we listen to the people that drive the business forward. And we survey them a couple times a year. We only care about listening a few times a year. Like that's baffling to me. So that was the original idea is let's empower the voice of the employee. But to your point, if you take it too far and you get to a level of specificity that starts to highlight or make predictions from the AI on, hey, these are individuals that are bad, and these are the people that we should probably eliminate because they have maybe different perspectives of the business than what we want. I think we've crossed a line because it's our own values saying this, not because maybe society is saying this, that we don't want to see at Aware. So that means we won't build capability that can do that. But that means it has to work into the fine decision making that our product team is doing day in and day out. Other companies, to your point, might take a different approach because they are willing to build agents that track keystrokes because they do care about what's being typed on every keyboard and look at how many minutes you spend on a particular website. And you know better than I do that those technologies exist at scale today across some of the largest corporations in the world. Our view is just different. What if we could actually shift the power dichotomies that exist today and instead maybe say, what if you at scale digitize the voice of the employee in a way that honors the privacy of the individuals by instead, in an aggregate way, reporting this level of information and delivering it to the boardroom, or maybe in the future, maybe think decades from now, maybe the board would look like a few seats of highly subjective individuals that have their own thinking that drives decision making. And then there's a couple seats that represent the digital voice of the employee at scale. And maybe that's a voting seat. Like, why would that not be something we could have in the future? I think we got it right if that maybe emerges long term. I know it's kind of crazy to believe, but it does start with us making sure that what it is that we're building doesn't necessarily rely heavily on science or math to violate the individual's own privacy in these certain scenarios. And that opinion on where the privacy is does vary both around the globe, country to country, and individual to individual. So we won't always get it right. I guarantee you we always get it right. But I do guarantee that when we get it wrong, we will adjust and we do listen and pay attention to our customer base. And that's pivotal to building highly innovative new technology in a space that just doesn't exist yet.
I think that board seat idea is a really fascinating idea. It's almost a level of respect for each employee. It almost could be viewed as like a form of compensation, right? It's a level of trust.
Imagine how positive things would be. And maybe we'd see something different than this because it's not happened. But I don't know. The people that have the best understanding of the business are those that spend their time crying, bleeding, sweating over it every single day and have the closest proximity to the customer. And that's the employee. So versus some individual in a boardroom who's maybe not even an operator who has limited views and context of what's going on, making decisions for the company today. And so it sounds so crazy that that's not how we operate. And I view that as maybe an achievable but long-standing goal. Is we got this right when years and years from now, that's perhaps what's changed. Is those employees that work at the organization are those that actually drive the decision making.
I want to jump into one last question, give you a little bit of freedom to kind of state where your mind at, just because for your whole life, it seems like you've been on the cutting edge of technology, whether it's intercepting Al-Qaeda signals or leveraging LLMs and implementing them into 10,000 plus size organizations, large enterprises. Interested to hear your perspective on the most common current applications of AI within large enterprises, given that you're selling into those folks that are typically implementing and trying to leverage this kind of new cutting edge software.
It's interesting because I think people don't necessarily know yet, right? There's a lot of exploration that's happening, which is leading to a lot of testing of any new thing that sounds cool. The challenge that we hear from the market, even beyond Aware, is that there are so many hundreds, if not thousands, of businesses and ideas emerging that are basically reaching out to the customer base, the enterprise market, and saying, hey, we have this cool new thing that uses AI to do this or that. You should talk to us. And the challenge the market has is it's so crowded right now and it's so hard to understand what's real and what's not that it's actually causing some stagnation. Like people aren't able to move forward because they're stuck in this position of trying to decipher what's real and what's not real and what could really change the game or not change the game. And you'll hear crazy applications of AI that will, just to take maybe the security space, that will look at people's faces in Zoom meetings and try to communicate decisions that should be made based upon physical emotion of the workforce and partners and customers, et cetera. But I don't know. I think a lot of people challenge that. Like, how viable is that? Is that okay to even do? The market doesn't even yet really know. Like, this stuff is so new that I think there's so much exploration. Now, I do believe that it will completely change over the next few years, where you have a tendency with any sort of new technology shift to eventually find the mean, right? Like, we'll get rid of a lot of the extraneous solutions and end up finding out that there's core set that will really drive modern change and innovation. And that could be attached to large language model work that's being done today. But I think what's more likely to happen is you'll get this verticalization of AI where it's really solving core business problems that exist today, like to a high degree of specificity and accuracy. And that could be being able to price policies for insurance companies far better at scale, which ends up well for you and for me as a consumer, to making sure that the drinks that are sold across Starbucks are actually the drinks that should be sold, making sure that the policies that we put in place across the company are actually the policies that we should have that drive the greatest percentage likelihood of success for our business. I think that's all verticalization, but to do that really well, it has to know your company really well. So I think AI will start to see more contenders in our space who will start to take the AI that's very general today, which is literally mass generalization that things like ChatGPT are doing, and instead get to a level of specificity by understanding your business. And when we start to see that happen, I think we'll see a lot of real positive applications emerge. But today it's highly exploratory, and I'm excited for the future as to what can play out.
You're even starting to see that with agents too. We talked to a lot of companies who are kind of building the verticalization of agents with the hope to become a horizontal platform. But I think that is even way too early. I haven't come across a company yet that's nailed it. And same with transformers. Everyone's building a transformer, but I think we'll move into a multi-model environment, and you'll start to see more state space models and different types of models popping up. But right now we're in the very early days.
So true. So true.
And to end, Jeff, we have 2 questions for you. The first is, what motivates you to work hard?
This is an easy one or a hard one, depending upon what perspective you take. Motivation for me, it comes down to people. If I'm being very real with you, I work as hard as I do because I care so much about the people that we are helping around the globe, the individuals that are ignored, the companies that I believe should be helped, and even the individuals that work at Aware, like the employees that are even at this company. They're the large motivating factor for me. I care so much about human beings. And I know it sounds corny to say, but I generally do. That it's why I get up every single morning, because I believe what it is that we're doing is really meaningful for the individual. I think this whole idea around artificial intelligence replacing the human at the enterprise is both naive and kind of illogical. And I don't think it's going to lead to the best outcome. I think in the end, AI has to be great at augmenting the workforce, augmenting the individual, empowering them. And if we do that well, and we don't ignore the human that works at every company, I think good things are going to happen. That's what I believe. That's why I work as hard as I do every single day. And I think, we're making meaningful strides towards that. So it motivates me to get up every single morning.
Definitely. And what's a piece of advice you'd give your younger self?
Geez, so many things. Probably I would give myself a level of confidence that maybe you'd think I would have had back in the day, but I didn't always have. And that's just the confidence of knowing that you should continue to accept the risks that you believe are worth accepting. And don't worry so much about what could happen. Instead, focus on what happened. What would life be like if it did actually happen positively? Like, don't always think about the bad things that could emerge. What if this went great? Like, what then would play out? And instead operate like that. I would tell myself years ago just to believe that and really take that to the core of all the things I was doing and accept the risk, and instead operate with that mentality. It took me years to really get to that level of understanding, but if I told myself that maybe 15, 20 years ago, I think we could be in a far better state than we are today. So that'd be the advice I'd probably tell myself.
Great. Well, Jeff, this has been so much fun hearing more about Aware and also just your background. It's really a fascinating product that I think is kind of category creating. So thank you so much for taking the time to come on and chat with Laura and I.
Thank you for having me, guys. I appreciate it.